Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Simakov. I'm the Senior Research Fellow with the Energy Environment Unit at Policy Exchange, the UK's foremost public policy research institute. We're pleased to convene today for a very timely discussion on one of the most important issues facing Britain, the state and future of our national energy system. Almost exactly 1 year ago today, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine and weaponization of energy exports brought Europe's power markets to the brink of collapse. The experience of 2022 has then more than validated our investment in renewable energy. It's made clear that further decarbonization and electrification is essential not just for the planet, but for our economy and our national security. In April, this government introduced the British Energy Security Strategy, a major component of which being the Review of Electricity Market Arrangements, or REMA. It's the largest reform of the sector since privatization, affecting every aspect save retail markets and consumer protection that will be handled through a separate but closely connected process. The consultation was launched in July and is now underway with policy development and implementation through much of this decade. REMA's goal is to guide our transition to a secure, affordable, and carbon-free power system by 2035 and ultimately a net zero economy by 2050. There's much for the UK's power system to be proud of. This government deserves credit for overseeing the emergence of a world-class wind sector that has developed over 27 gigawatts of capacity and boasts the renewable pipelines of over 160. It's a power sector that's reduced by its emissions by 68% over the past decade to become one of the cleanest in Europe. But the electricity system is evolving. It's moving from a post-war grid that delivered power from a small number of large coal plants to a spider web that intakes and dispatches power from 1 million nodes, increasingly powered by intermittent energy. There are major challenges ahead, and we need smart market design to overcome them. In the immediate term, despite the low cost of renewables, costly natural gas continues to set the marginal price that consumers and businesses pay for power. Delivering that power, getting that wind from Scotland to London is increasingly expensive. Balancing costs, resolving that congestion on our overburdened transmission lines has gone up from 500 million in 2015 to over 1.5 billion last year and rising. Over the long term, to achieve net zero power by 2035, we must increase grid capacity by 150%. That's the equivalent of adding 10 gigawatts or building 3 Hinkley Point C nuclear stations each and every year. Paying for all that's going to be a challenge. So we pioneered some great concepts like contracts for differences and new ones like the regulated asset-based model that's being put into the field for new nuclear. A major objective for REMA is ensuring that we can attract the £1 trillion of capital necessary to finance this transition. We need new tools to ensure that investors see the UK as the premier destination for their private capital, providing regulatory certainty and attractive rates of return. And if that wasn't enough, we need to ensure that this new electricity system effectively intersects with emerging markets for heat, hydrogen, and carbon. If we get this right, we'll have a system that incentivizes consumers to respond to real market signals in the right place at the right time. At stake are millions of jobs and the competitiveness of Britain's economy. To help us understand these questions, we have a very distinguished panel to join us. To my left is John Penrose, Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare, and the author of a recent report, Power to the People, An Unfinished Revolution on Reforming Retail Consumer Markets. We have Laura Sands, former MP for South Thanet, Chair of the Government's Energy Digitalisation Taskforce, and Director at SGN, Highview Power, and Energy Systems Catapult. We're pleased to welcome Kuljit Bains, Head of Forward Trading at E.ON UK, and Andy Manning, Principal Policy Manager of Energy Networks and Systems at Citizens Advice. Thank you all for joining us today. John, if we can start with you. It's been a busy start of the year for your government. Prime Minister has split BEIS into 4, including the new Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, DZNES. Your colleague Secretary Shapps has just shared his ambition to achieve the cheapest wholesale electricity in Europe by 2035. What are you expecting and what are you hoping from this new department over the coming months?
So I think it's always a mistake to invest too many hopes in what Whitehall calls machinery of government changes, because bitter experience, and I'm sure many people in the room and online will know, if you're not very careful, what happens is that nothing happens for 6 months while everybody gets their business cards reprinted, and then sort of the machine sort of grinds painfully back into life. What I hope will happen this time, though, is that we end up with, or we've now got an energy department which is purely focused. Yeah? It wasn't sort of massively diversified before when it was BEIS, but now it's just basically dealing with energy, and that is one of the most pressing household and economic issues the country is facing, and actually Western Europe is facing. That focus, I think, will be very, very valuable indeed. We also have the advantage that that Grant Shapps has a business background, is pretty commercial in his approach. So, for example, I was very, very pleased when he said, look, I want to have the cheapest wholesale energy by 2035. I think that's absolutely right. The only thing I might quibble with is whether or not that's fast enough, but it's the right kind of direction to be going in. And I think if I was running a manufacturing business, particularly an energy-heavy manufacturing business in the UK, that's the kind of thing I want to hear. Although again, I might want to have it happen faster. So, directionally helpful, but let's not count too many chickens in the short term. It does need to move quickly as a result.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Laura, you've seen the consultation document from July. Do you think the department is striking the right balance between decarbonisation, affordability, and security? Is there anything else you want to see in forthcoming updates?
Yes, I mean, I'm very interested in the whole REMA process. I'm going to be a little bit critical here because actually I don't see how you can look at the wholesale reform until you have actually done the retail reform, because you've got to sequence this. And one of the things that's interesting, and you know, people who are obsessed with markets need what I call programming. So they need an objective and a set of outcomes. They're a little bit like an algorithm. You need to program them to deliver something. And I wasn't clear in the consultation on REMA actually what it was trying to achieve. So a lot of these are sort of very, very well-trodden ideas, whether it be locational pricing, etc., all of which are potentially valid. But I just needed to understand what the destination was looking like. So if one sort of wants to articulate some of this destination, we are going from 400 people in the energy sector who all know each other's golf handicap, right, to 100 million actions and assets. This is a very, very dynamic system. Demand is equal to supply and needs to be rewarded, and I didn't see in REMA enough focus on how do we unlock the markets for the demand side rather than just the supply side. We need 20 to 30 gigawatts by 2035 of demand side flexibility. I would have loved to have seen an ambition which said we want a flex-centric energy system, because otherwise we're going to end up having to build huge amount of assets. And the ESO says very clearly that by 2035 we will have the number of EVs on the system will equate to 3 nuclear power stations. So that whole demand side needs to be unlocked. And I do think we've got to be a little bit careful that we're not trying to retrofit or put sellotape around a mainframe system, when actually I think we're moving to a much more of a PC distributed system that will require a very different mindset. So I would worry about the sequencing. I would worry about what is its actual objective, and then whether we are sorting out the problems of today, not tomorrow. One little other point, which I'm sure you will come and question me on, and that is, it's interesting that the whole market is obsessed with commodities, right? Which of course is really, really important. If you go back to 1990, a terabyte of data was $1 million, and today it's 5 cents. Because the sector has moved from being a commodity sector to actually all of it being mainly about capital assets. And if you think about wind farms, you think about solar, you think about the distributed energy system, this is becoming a capital system, a capital asset system rather than a commodity system.
Thank you, Laura. It's a perfect transition to Cully. To pull this off, we're going to need obviously a tremendous amount of investment. The past year has been anything but certain for whether it's suppliers, for developers, and energy service providers. What do you think REMA is doing right now to deliver confidence for investors? Is it creating a more stable investment environment? And are there risks you see on the current pathway the government is pursuing?
So REMA's got some lofty goals, but one of the main things REMA set out to do was to provide businesses, households with a fair chance to reap all of the rewards as well as the climate. So I'm going to concentrate on what the energy sector needs to do for that cohort, those customers and the people out there. And they can be broken down into two separate sections. One is the engaged customer, the flexibility. Those customers who want to be part of the problem, who want to be actively managing their load, whether that be through solar panels on their roof or whether it be turning down in times of like DFS. Other customers, and the majority of customers, just want stability. They want stable prices. Now, what REMA has to deliver, if we take that second challenge, REMA has to deliver a balance between generators and suppliers. And where you can see that balance happening is in the wholesale markets. Retailers can provide customers with a stable price by going into the market, buying little and often over time, and smoothing out the movements and the volatility that you speak about in the wholesale market. So that's what the customer needs, and that's actually what the suppliers were initially asked to do. Price cap, buy over this period of time, take the prudent, if you're a prudent supplier, you'll take this prudent action and you'll smooth it out. But the generation system, now, we have been very good at converting to getting off of coal, getting off of gas and getting onto wind and having more renewable generation. We've done that brilliantly over the last few years. But the pricing structures for those generators does not match the pricing structure for the retailers. Those generators are pushed to going shorter and shorter term. They lock in their margins in the very, very short term. What this creates is a discrepancy. You have a wholesale market where suppliers are trying to buy out their long term, generators are trying to sell their short term, and you have an illiquid market. The UK power market is one of the most illiquid markets in Europe. And you can discuss gas prices, and you can discuss gas prices being the key. But power prices over this period were even more extreme. And it was because of that lack of liquidity. So what REMA needs to do, REMA needs to bring that balance back into the wholesale market. Because by having an efficiently run wholesale market with its liquid, where buyers and sellers can monetize and lock in and make investment decisions because they know they can trade, they know they can get the volume they need, that will open up. Investment decisions will become quicker. Customers can get the stability, but that balance needs to be created. So any system REMA puts in needs to balance both sides of the equation and create a very liquid wholesale market. Second side, as we said, it's the flexibility. You talk about volatility as being a bad thing. Well, for flexibility owners, volatility is a great thing. That's what they want. Volatility allows them to earn that rent from the market, whether it be a storage asset or whether it be a customer. Times of high prices has to turn down. So REMA has to balance the investment in battery storage and other forms of flexibility alongside the volatility needed to get it onto the system. Because volatility for the customer who will pay for everything they have to have stable prices. They have to have a bill that they can rely on, and they can know what they're paying next month, next quarter, next year. So when we do need flexibility. The way the system's set up, we need that flexibility on the system, but we can't have flexibility with massive volatility.
Andy, if we achieve some of these goals, if REMA moves forward, if we acknowledge some of these risks that we're taking, what are some of the differences that British families and businesses could hope to see? What do you hope that REMA can set out to achieve to improve their lot as well?
Yeah, so clearly we're all aware we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. We at Citizen Advice see REMA as part of the exit path from that. We're building on Laura's point, it's not a part by itself. It has to be seen in the context of retail reform, and in particular the design of a social tariff, and also our approach to energy efficiency. So first I agree with Laura, absolutely we need to look at all those together. So they may well be technically excluded from REMA, but they've got to work absolutely hand in glove. And as part of that, this delivers two ways for customers. So customers as a whole and customers individually. So as a whole, this is about lowering the overall system costs. So the massive investment you spoke about, Alex, making sure that's delivered at an efficient rate. the link to marginal gas prices that's driving a lot of the higher costs, managing that, and also the higher constraint costs. REMA should be a way of delivering lower overall system costs. But then building on what Kuljit says, it's also an opportunity for individual consumers. If we can send the right signals to consumers, consumers can be at the heart of the energy transition. This is a new way for consumers to manage energy costs. So previously, you had energy efficiency, you had changing suppliers. Clearly, that one's not quite happening at the moment. So this is a new way that by changing your behaviour, it gives you a third way of managing your energy costs. So that's a great opportunity. A couple of the things that comes with that is that does bring risks that people who cannot be flexible. What do we do those? And there's two parts of that. One, I don't think we should just be accepting there's a certain set of consumers that we need to protect. We should be trying to engage and make sure as many people have access to getting value from their flexibility. But then also we do need those protections, that ultimately those, with all the efforts we make to engage, are left exposed to higher price signals, get the protections that they need.
Excellent.
I think one of the key things you said just there is enabling the customer to use the flexibility that they have is going to be cheaper than more wires, more power stations, and that reduces the cost for everybody.
Totally.
So unlocking that, and we are really interested in unlocking the potential of the customer and getting them more engaged in the market.
Laurie, you've just published a co-wrote a report on an exact topic, enabling decentralized energy innovation.
Yeah.
Can you point to some of the specific practical things that this government and department could do to unlock some of that flexibility?
I mean, firstly, it's got to unlock the market equally to demand and supply. So distributed energy systems have to be given equality to, let's say, offshore wind. I mean, in the sense of access to markets. I would question that there are only going to be a few people who are going to be interested in flexibility, because I think it's going to be, again, very like that data world, where I don't know where the data on my mobile phone is coming from. Is it a local data cache? Is it my own thing? Everything is going to be optimized on behalf of customers. And you will buy packages, blocks of energy and services that will allow that to happen. One of the things on the distributed energy side is we are not able, I mean, in some ways, one would look at this as you're not getting the benefit of self-serving yourself, right? You're not getting the benefit of trading with your neighbour, which again helps with all your flexibility and also the network costs. You're not incentivized. There's a great system that's going on, being trialled in Spain, for example, where you have your own solar power, and energy costs you nothing. Electricity costs you absolutely nothing. What you do is you pay a subscription to the network operator to store your energy. And it's actually like iCloud. So it draws down during the day and you pull it back at night. And as a result, you have a fixed cost because it's a subscription, and you are actually maintaining, in some ways, creating your almost microgrids within villages, within areas of towns. And those are the sorts of models we've got to liberate the energy sector to come up with, these models that will look very different in London, in a village, in the north of Scotland. These are all different communities with different needs. And that, if we can unlock those business models, then we're going to start to really optimize the system and put actually customers and their circumstances at the heart of it.
To the group again, we have discussed a number of reforms that are going to be coming into place starting really in 2025. In the meantime, we continue to have record high prices that are squeezing families and industries. REMA's talked about a number of no-regret reforms that we can implement in the near term to help achieve some of these improvements that we're all looking for. There's been a number of ideas floating around splitting markets, green power pools, things like that could be implemented potentially sooner. I'd love to get your thoughts on what some of those opportunities might be and risks pursuing those. And if we can start with you, Citizens Advice just put out a really strong report, splitting the market. Would you like to share some thoughts on what that entailed?
Yeah, no problem. So firstly, I think it's important to note that REMA itself needs to be looking at a long-term sustainable solution. So we shouldn't. REMA, I think it's right, should be looking at long-term and not necessarily aiming at what we could categorise as quick wins. But nevertheless, we are in the middle of an affordability crisis. So we've seen the Green Power Pool suggestions, which have a lot of merits to them, but I think if we want something to implement in relatively short timescales, from a risk point of view, it seems safer to be looking at already existing mechanisms. So I think CFDs, which we spoke about, the great success of them, is if there's a way of evolving CFDs, perhaps on this semi-voluntary route, I think that would achieve a lot of the aspects of what the Green Power Pool is trying to do, but without having too much of a radical change too soon, and with the risks that inherently brings with it. I think just about a slightly wider aspect I talked earlier about social tariffs. I know the Green Power Pool looks to try and link the generation that is generated under the Green Power Pool to the support. But clearly, I think we're very clear with the view that you need to work out how much support people need with their bills, and that needs to be designed from the viewpoint of the need of the consumer, rather than the amount of generation that sits under any particular arrangement.
John, what do you think?
I'd sort of half agree with Andy, but I want us to be a great deal more ambitious. I don't think we're aiming anywhere near high enough. I don't think we're trying to move anywhere near fast enough. You know, the crisis is now. You know, people are struggling with their energy bills today. People can see that they're paying far, far, far too much for the renewable energy that they're consuming, where the cost has been falling for years and years and years, and because it's all being priced, as we've heard already, quite rightly, off the spot gas price. This is wrong. It's both wrong economically, it's wrong morally, and it is pauperising people today. And so I don't think we can bimble along taking years over REMA. I think that what we need to do is to say, you can probably come up with something which is, you know, pretty future-proof in a matter of weeks or months. They've been consulting about it, for goodness sake, for months already. I think we should have something in place by this summer. Mm-hmm. We should be publishing a white paper within weeks, if necessary. I don't think they're ready to do this, incidentally, but that's the kind of speed that we need to achieve, because quite a lot of this stuff as well, if you're trying to get the kinds of huge scales of investment, which I think you started off by saying are going to be necessary, and I think everybody on this panel agrees with, you aren't going to be able to do that if you're going to spend 10 flipping years introducing piecemeal regulatory changes, which every time you do it, move the goalposts on the environment into which people are going to try and invest. So we need something which is much, much faster than that. It can then, once you've published the blueprint, it can then take a while to get into place. Mm-hmm. But you've got to publish a blueprint with a timetable and some deadlines which people can see and invest on the back of, and you've got to do it within weeks and months, rather than bimbling along with all the time in the world, because we ain't got it.
I mean, yeah, I would absolutely agree. I mean, to be frank, on one level, we've wasted 2 or 3 years of, in some ways, examining navels and doing all sorts of sort of analysis. Actually, what we have is we do have the technology, we do have the know-how. What we're not doing is actually implementing things. And I think John's point is we need also to present to the public the decarbonisation dividend, right? Exactly. And the dividend is that we do have really very, I mean, to be frank, quite stable renewable cost, dropping all the time. Yep. And we need to unlock that. And in some ways, what we've been doing is we've been trying to squeeze a renewable asset class, which is capital assets, lower marginal cost, into a fossil fuel paradigm. So we're trying to squeeze 2 totally different approaches into this old, I mean, you know, will be the past. So let's unlock that. I do believe that a social tariff absolutely takes away a lot of the problems that we've got. All these suppliers end up with a huge amount of social obligations. Which, absolutely right, but they should sit within the social tariff, and as a result, you liberate the rest of the market to do a lot of flex, a lot of exciting things, very similar to the broadband market, where you've got a boring, regulated price, and then you've got competition on top. But that is really important. What Citizens Advice have done, and I know John's talked about this many times, and Michael Grubb, is we do need to decouple these two markets. Actually, the gas side of the power sector, when it's used, is mainly used for peaking. So that can be at the premium side, and the actual base load, which is the social tariff, can be the renewables base. Now, I mean, there are lots of variants in that and all the rest of it, but fundamentally, we should not be charging people for their green energy at the same price as their fossil fuel energy.
Excellent.
I think very exciting.
The two systems can be described, if you take fossil and green out, you can describe the two systems as you have a high capital,
Yeah.
low running costs.
Yeah.
Or you can have relatively lower capital, but then extremely high running costs. And those are the two pools that we're talking about here. And the CFD mechanism, as you mentioned, could be adapted and could be used to incentivise more into either one of those two pots that you're looking at. But be wary of quick changes. You need to understand what's happening in the market. We still have price caps. We still have customers who are going to be paying the prices that are in the wholesale market. Uncertainty can breed illiquidity in an already illiquid market. So what we can't do is make that market even more illiquid, because it will tend to increase prices for the customer. So we need to make sure that, yes, we can move faster. Yes, we need to do more, but let's not take our eye off the ball and throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keep an eye on the ball, make sure that we've got that eye on liquidity, and making sure the customers are actually paying the fair price.
I'd like to turn to the audience for a round of questions, please. If you could please state your name and association. Thank you very much. Any questions? We have a question from online from Laura Sochat from Charles River Associates.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, just barely, Laura, yes.
Okay, I'll try and speak quite loudly. Hey, thank you very much. I think that the discussion is very interesting. I was wondering how, you mentioned trying to come up with a solution within weeks or months, but don't you think there's a risk of coming up with solutions to short-term problems without really fixing what really is a long-term issue?
John, please.
Yes, that's always a risk for almost any kind of public policy announcement. So yes, of course, that is a risk that is potentially there. However, there's been an awful lot of thought going on into this, not just by the five of us up here, but by many of the people watching and in the room here today as well. There's getting everybody together in a room with a big pot of coffee and locking the door and saying you can't come out until you've got an answer which is future-proof and which is minimising the regulatory burden so that commercial decisions can happen quickly without having to go to people like me for permission. That's something which I think there's a lot of accumulated wisdom and understanding. So I think you could get there quite fast, but you are right, Laura, that you'd have to do it in a way which checks back against industry participants to make sure that you aren't making some sort of screaming error. But it isn't that we are starting from scratch here. A lot of people have thought about this. I just firmly believe that the potential and the understanding is there, providing you crystallise it the right way.
I mean, one thing we haven't spoken about actually is energy efficiency. That we can absolutely kick off immediately to try and reduce whole system costs. And, there are lots of mechanisms that you could really turbocharge in that field. And there's a task force that's being set up to do that. I hope that there will be some very immediate actions. And that then starts to absolutely put the rubber on the road in terms of bills. These other things, I totally agree with John. We've done a lot of thinking. Let's just get on with it. And we'll only actually find out once we start doing how we need to pivot if we do.
Energy efficiency and investment in energy efficiency It is the most non-regret option.
No regrets.
Yeah, there are no regrets. The easiest way to loosen our system, to make it better, is to take demand off it by making everybody's house more efficient. And there is no downside to making people's homes more efficient.
and offices and factories.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was just going to add, I think it feels there's room for an evolutionary approach in the short term. So the 2020 is where a lot of this investment is needed. And then as long as we can make that coherent with what could be a different approach from the 2030s on, so I feel that I agree there's a solution in there, but to deal with the risks that Laura was pointing out, I think something that evolves from current mechanisms feels a way of managing that risk.
I mean, there is actually an interesting thing. I spoke to the low carbon contracts company a while ago, saying you could miniaturise contracts for difference. So what you could do is you could have a contracts for difference in an energy efficiency rollout. It's more complicated, but it's not impossible. Or for heat pump deployment. So just because these are micro assets rather than huge wind farms, the mechanism itself can be utilised.
It's just one point that John made, which I think is very important, is regardless of what we think about timescales for implementing stuff, getting to a decision point quickly to give that clarity to investors and everybody, obviously with due process, but getting to that decision point quickly is clearly very important.
We have on the line, excellent, some folks in the room as well. We have a gentleman up front and right behind him as well.
Hi, I'm David Blackman, representing Utility Week magazine. Hello. Just a question about sort of the politics of this, given we've got one politician, one recent politician on the panel, and the rest. But this is a very technical area we're talking about today. Lots of detail. We're actually sort of confronted by some sort of very pressing front and centre retail consumer issues at the moment. How do you convince Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt that this isn't one of those barnacles, as Linton Crosby would put it, that you don't need to deal with, given that we're at most probably 18 months before a general election?
And one more.
Hi there. I'm Simon Main. I'm from Brookfield. I just wanted to put something else into the room, which is that one of the transmission mechanisms for getting low renewable prices into the real economy is through the contracts that businesses are signing with those generators. And actually that is probably one of the primary routes to market that people are bringing in. Just as how do you deal with the problem that in signing a 10, 15-year contract today, and in 2, 3 or 4 years' time, the entire structure of the market might be thrown up in terms of nodal pricing or totally, bifurcated system? Are we putting a different risk onto the market? I enjoyed the points about liquidity and the importance of liquidity in markets. That's exactly how these contracts are priced, and that's how they're thought of. So indeed, that is the coalface of the risk that we're talking about by doing things quickly, is that you cause a massive hiatus in investment at exactly this time. So how do we deal with that?
So first question from David on what do we do to convince the Prime Minister that this is important?
Should I start with that?
I hope so.
I think I probably ought to start with that one. So I think you are right that this is an incredibly technical, nerdy area, and it's only nerds like me in Parliament who are into the detail. But I don't think that needs to stop us, because there's a burning political platform at the moment which is high energy costs, both for energy intensive industries and the jobs that are dependent on them, and also household bills. And if you can say, look, we can start to dramatically or even just incrementally reduce those household bills in particular from what they would otherwise have been, by having a market which lets those lower renewables prices flow through in a way which they're just not doing at the moment, and this will make a difference quickly and at an increasing rate between now and over the next 18 months. If we act now, that will get Rishi Sunak's attention, that will get Jeremy Hunt's attention, because he's the one who's having to subsidise this stuff as well. And providing we can come up with a black box, detailed, nerdy answer, the output of which is either of those two things, you'll get plenty of attention from the top of government very, very quickly indeed.
I would absolutely agree. I do think the energy efficiency thing is something that one really can lean into and is understandable. I'm not sure that saying we're going to have the lowest energy costs without any substance behind it is totally making sense at the moment, but I'm sure they'll come up with something. There are a pile of decisions that are sitting on ministers' desks at the moment. I think they need to get through them and move forward, because actually I think we're at a bottleneck. One thing I would say to the Chancellor very, very clearly is the Inflation Reduction Act in the States is a game changer, is absolutely massive, and we have to respond if we want to be in this game at all. I was with some of your colleagues actually at Brookfield, and I understand, you know, big investment companies are saying US first, Europe second, Asia third, and if you've got any sort of peanuts at the end of it, maybe you could look at the UK. And that is the message that we need to get across to the Chancellor.
Kuljit, to Simon's point on, we have a situation now where we're asking folks to make major investments in the market. We're also telling them the market is going to look existentially different in 5 years. How do we square that circle?
Well, it's the not knowing. Liquidity and market problems is the not knowing. And if the period of not knowing is long enough, it builds and builds and builds, and it just stagnates the market. So REMA does need to start to deliver some clearer ideas, some clearer directions in which way it's going, because that's what the market will work towards. What we can't have is long periods of time with either nothing happening or just an open question, because the markets will react to that by doing nothing. And that's exactly the wrong thing for the market to be doing. As I said, the UK electricity market suffers from poor liquidity, and it suffered from poor liquidity prior to the invasion of Ukraine. You know, it's been a hot topic for us in the trading market to really improve that. So if any short-term solutions need to take that into account, not to make a bad situation worse, and not to leave long spells where the industry just doesn't know what's happening.
Can I just follow up on that? Because I think that's absolutely right. That's why I was talking about having a white paper within weeks or months. Because the white paper can then set out a timetable which may take years to deliver, but it's got the deadlines in it, and people can see when they're coming, and they can invest on the back of that because they know when nodal pricing will be introduced, and they can take a view on what that will mean for them and where they site their assets. But if they know what's going to happen, then they know. And that's where we've got to get to, and it's not knowing and not having that white paper with that vision, which is going to absolutely crucify us.
To the audience, we have Jack in the second row and a fellow in a yellow sweater behind him.
Hi, thank you. Jack Richardson from the Conservative Environment Network. I just wanted to bring it back to local pricing specifically. So imagine if the government did say, right, we're going to crack on with local pricing, if that then comes to MPs and they think that their constituents are at risk of a postcode lottery. So some might be very happy because their constituents are getting lower bills, whereas others will be a bit more annoyed. How do you think you can overcome that barrier, or do you think that we should move towards maybe doing it for industry first, particularly to try and sell it to steel companies to get their electricity prices down to a more competitive level? Yeah, I just wanted to get the whole panel's thoughts on that.
Hi there, Vincenzo from Jamsurf. It's a really fascinating discussion, and it's glad to see quite a lot of agreement, but can we play forward that advice that seems to be forming around making a quick decision now? I'd be interested in views on what the next step you'd like to see or think needs to happen should be. So who should move and do what? And a link to that, if that's someone getting out of the way or kind of moving out of being a barrier, do you have a clear idea of who needs to make movement in this space?
Mm-hmm. Jack, if I can actually take the privilege. I've never quite enjoyed the term postcode lottery. It's like calling real estate a postcode lottery. Like London just miraculously has higher real estate prices. There's a market for it, and there's a reason, because there's higher demand here, and you have to pay a premium to live in London for that reason. Same thing with energy. We obviously have a surplus of energy in certain parts of the country. Those parts of the country are often the areas that we're targeting to level up. I'd like to see investment attracted to parts of the northeast, parts of the coast, where we do have wind connecting. Likewise, if you want to get that power to the southeast, and you have to occupy transmission systems that cost billions of pounds. I think it's fair and sensible for there to be a premium to be paid for accessing that power. I think that's a very good way to spread around some of the industrial activity instead of keeping it concentrated where it currently is. But I'm sure our panel will have some other thoughts.
I certainly agree.
I know. You're on the same page.
We know you're on side, Jack.
How do we pitch it? We pitch it? Yeah.
I'd agree with your starting point that there is a whole agenda around levelling up, which is valuable and important and which people will respond to. The other bit which I think we also need to stress is this is one of the very, very, very few silver linings of having sky-high energy prices at the moment. You can say, look, this will, we can picture it as this is discounts from where you are at the moment. It'll make your energy cheaper if you have an energy asset sited near you or you're properly sited. So it's a way of giving you cheaper energy based on where we are now. So you are right to say you've got to pitch this in the right way and explain to people why they're going to be better off. But because we're starting from where we are, partly through that levelling up, partly through the fact that you can therefore create discounts, I think that probably gets you through that initial acceptance period. But you are also right to say it's not just a complete slam dunk. It will require some delicacy. Yeah.
Andy?
I think, just a few observations. So I think certainly at the domestic level, I think it's important to remember we need any pricing signals to be useful signals. And it feels like a stretch that at a domestic level, people are going to make decisions about where they're using demand on the basis of locational signals. So I think it is about, as you were suggesting, about who we apply the locational signals to, and there are examples where they're applied only on the supply side, I think in Italy, and I said then there's choices about which demand customers to apply it to, but we certainly, I think, has to be part of the equation to deal with constraint costs, if nothing less. But I think just because maybe we shouldn't be applying them to domestic necessarily, shouldn't allow that to colour the fact that they would still be useful to be applied to the right people. So useful signals is what we want.
Could I sort of come in on this as well? And that is, I don't know whether the energy sector learns enough from other sectors, because a lot of people have gone through this process before, and I come back to the data and streaming sector. So if what you do is you buy Netflix, right, there are lots of locational constraints in the data world. John knows probably better than I do, but we all pay the same amount for Netflix, right, wherever you are, because actually that pricing stands away from the customer, and there's no reason why it should be transferred to the customer. It is about you managing your assets most effectively and in the most sort of cost-effectively way. So I think but I come back to this thing, we have got to design this retail market properly so that one can actually start doing a lot more clever stuff away from the customer, not trying to engage them in how much their energy is going to be or any downgrade of their property price because their electricity is going to be more expensive or less, because it will have ramifications right across the board. But I do think we should be looking at other sectors who've got exactly the same problems. They've solved them. Fantastic.
Vincenzo's question is on who steps first, who's the one we're looking for to make a decision on this, to put pen on paper and say we've been consulting for a long time, we've been discussing for a long time, we need some kind of plan of action. Who are we looking to?
It's got to be Grant.
Yeah.
It's got to be the department. It's the white paper.
Yeah.
That's what's got to happen. They're the only people who can. There's been an awful lot of consultation now, so they ought to have the ammunition. I think the problem's been bandwidth within what was Bays and is now DESNES. Is that?
I was asking a more difficult question, which is
sorry.
You've got the white paper that's
Yeah.
been published. What should ministers expect as the next step? Who should be making that next step after the white paper? Because I think that the signals we've been talking about are really important, and take that as a given. But someone's got to act on the signals, and I think everyone will be looking around the table to see who's going to act first. So if you have carte blanche, who should be moving first? Investors, generators, suppliers.
I see. So my guess is that if you publish a white paper with the kind of forward action plan with deadlines that we were talking about before to give people regulatory certainty, that answer kind of falls out from that. So whatever the next deadline is the thing that needs to happen. Actually relatively little of it, I think, but we need to see. I think that quite a little of it needs to be primary legislation. quite a lot of it would be some tweaks to, you might have some primary legislation, for example, to end the retail price cap. That would be requiring. But quite a lot of it, you can make changes to the contracts for difference regime by an announcement. Yeah. So either the department or Ofgem or whoever can do quite a lot without needing to go through Parliament very much. Although we'll need to come, some things will need to come back through Parliament to be delivered on a few occasions.
Andy?
I think I'm probably just expressing my natural personality. I think these very technical issues, and there's a big part of me, although I absolutely get the need for urgent action, there's a big part of me thinking, well, we've got to make sure we've done our analysis absolutely rigorously. The technical question needs a technical answer, doesn't it? So I just like to express I've got this deep-bed reluctance to moving. We've got to make sure we follow due process, but within that, act as expediently as we can.
But also there is an issue here about, I mean, I think the sequencing is quite important, and I would absolutely say that retail market reform, and particularly because it's right at the forefront from a political point of view, is absolutely crucial to really turbocharge, to get that shape right. And once you've got that shape, then the rest of those things, whether it be the wholesale market, whether it be demand side market reform, flexibility, etc., can then fold into it. But I think John's point is really important. We need a timetable, we need sequencing, because we're building, for example, we're building all this offshore wind, fantastic, you know, hey, oh, what about that transmission business? Oh my God. So we're building farms with no roads to them, okay? Amazing, right? We are building a huge amount of fantastic energy, and we're not building any refrigeration, i.e. storage for it, right? This is actually a project management job. And it needs timetables, sequencing, decision gateways. And to be frank, I think between everyone in this room and your coffee-filled room, it would take us half a day to just fill that wall with exactly what needs to happen between now and 2035. I would love
half a day. Wow, well, I was saying weeks and months. Half a day, ladies and gentlemen.
No, seriously, because I think I think we know the components. What I think we need to do, though, is to ensure that that is published. Once that's published, right, do you know we can all get on with it? Because everyone is desperate to move. They're desperate to move forward.
I think you're right. We can move quickly, but we can't ignore due process. This has to be implemented. We have to allow those people who are going to implement it time to implement it, understand it, and make sure the process is. So I think less haste, more speed. So there is an order of things that does need to be followed.
Laura's point about the retail markets, I completely agree. With my technical eye, I struggle to see on some certain aspects of REMA, so not all of them, things like locational pricing, unless you have some scenarios of what you think the retail market can look like. I struggle to see how you work out what the impact of the REMA proposals are.
What do you want out of it?
So just from an analytical point of view, if you don't know how signals are going to be reflected to end users, how can you do the maths to work out what the right answer is?
But you don't have to. The investors need to do that. You and I don't have to.
We can turn one more to Peter Flake we have online at Elder Technology. Peter, can you hear us?
Thank you very much. So my question is, what are you doing about storing energy during the summer to heat our homes in the winter?
Long-term storage?
Can I just sort of, I have this crazy life where I'm very much involved in the food system, and I'm very interested in the analogies. So before we had refrigeration in food, we lost 60% of food. So what has refrigeration done? It has absolutely extended. We have 2 wheat crops a year, and we eat bread every day, right? So this is a very volatile environment. So what do we have? So long duration storage is a bit like frozen food. Grid scale battery, right? So that is refrigerated warehousing. EV cars, flash freezing. The most interesting thing in the whole food system that optimizes the whole food system is the fridge in your home. Because if you didn't have a fridge in your home, supermarkets would have to be 4 times the size they are today. So that whole vector of refrigeration, i.e. storage, within the energy system actually lowers prices, it calms volatility, right? And it actually creates a much more optimized system design. And, you know, we should be really looking at, as I say, other sectors who've gone through this journey. Again, we haven't focused enough on storage, and to be frank, the consumer would not be very happy to know the amount of money that we're paying for curtailment.
Storage relies on volatility for the initial investment decision, but the more and more you build of it, the more you flatten the curve.
And then you become a procurement. It becomes a procurement business sector rather than a traded sector.
I'd like to conclude with one final question. We have 10 months left in 2023, election coming up at some point thereafter. What is a tangible deliverable that we can expect or hope to see from this government before the end of mandate that's going to bring our energy market a bit closer to the future, provide a bit more stability and comfort for consumers?
White paper by the summer.
John's timetable and sequencing.
Excellent. Colleen?
Yeah. Energy efficiency, doing something
Yes.
on energy efficiency seems something that we can do quickly.
So on REMA, I'm going to agree with John, but I'll stick to your question of by the end of 2023, clarity over the decision.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today, and everyone in the audience and online. Really appreciated your engagement and some more conversation, and we look forward to hosting subsequent events in the future to catch up and see if we've made any progress since this last time we assembled. Thank you all.
Fingers crossed.